learning to become. So we are bringing the focus groups together. We are mobilizing stakeholders from across cross-sectoral level, and it is a global debate on how to shape the future of people and planet by rethinking education, starting really from elementary level to higher academia. And it's my pleasure today to welcome you to the webinar with Professor Stefano Pilotto, and to think together about within this frame of future, how is the current situation, what can we imagine for the future, and especially in the frame of this topic today, on geopolitical aspects of international business, which will be presented by Professor Pilotto. We can exchange some questions and open discussion at the end of the session. I would just like to mention that it would be very important to keep short time and to allow to all participants to share the stage. So please, when you share your question, introduce yourself briefly and keep in time. Enjoy the presentation of Professor Pilotto, and I will be back afterwards. Thank you. Professor Pilotto, warmly welcome. To start, I would suggest that you introduce yourself and maybe tell more about also your activities by MIB beside of your role as a professor, because my personal relation with MIB has been holding for several years because of the MIB spirit you have spreaded. So warmly welcome, and I look forward.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. Thank you, Carolina, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, former students of MIB, former students of the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, or other students spread all over the world. Yes, I'm one of the professors of MIB Trieste School of Management. I was growing up in Italy, studying also abroad, studying in the United States of America, studying in France, studying also in other parts of Italy, namely in Rome. I got my PhD in History of International Relations, and then I started to work at MIB Trieste School of Management since the very beginning. Our school is more than 30 years of life, and we started to work with our dean, Professor Nanut, who created our school, and he had the idea to establish a business school in a crucial geographic location, which is Trieste, an amazing town in the northeastern side of Italy. And we started when we still had let's say, the division between East and West of Europe. So we had the Iron Curtain from Stettin in Poland to Trieste, and the eastern side of Europe was still quite apart. It was not easy to interact. So immediately we had an issue concerning the geopolitical aspect of the education. Can we transfer our education on the other side of the Iron Curtain? Can we establish good relations with those countries? Finally, yes, we could. And also we were lucky because 2 years after the establishment of MIB Trieste School of Management, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall and the huge interaction with the Central and Eastern European countries. So that was a new starting point, not only for Italy, but for the whole Europe. But today, the topic that we would like to analyze together is the geopolitical aspects of international business. Our business school, but also the international schools, are highly oriented toward the international environment. And which is the case of MIB Trieste School of Management. We can transfer to the audience the case of our school and how our school was facing this development and how geopolitical analysis is intervening nowadays in the general international business activity. So we have in front of us a huge world. We have more or less 200 countries in this world. They are interacting. And as we know, in the last decades, we had a huge development of globalization process. But what is globalization? Nowadays, what can we say when we look at this world after the huge pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, which has been representing a revolution for our existence and for the economic activity. That is why the short steps that I would like to analyze with you are the following one. First of all, which is the link between geopolitics and international business, and how this coronavirus pandemic has emphasized the need of establishing accurate forecasts and projections in order to plan the economic activity and to prepare new periods of prosperity, international trade, and economic transactions. Second, what will be the link between globalization process, the need to establish a business plan, the country analysis, which is a very important part of the business plan, and finally, the evaluation of risk. Risk is one of the core of the international economic activity, and very often we need to evaluate the risk. Geopolitical analysis can help in this, of course. And then we will focus our attention on the crisis and the geopolitical analysis. And we will have some example, for instance, of a crisis like the crisis we had in the Balkans, in the Middle East, in Ukraine. Nowadays, the explosion of crisis in Nagorno Karaback, in the Caucasus area, North Korea, Libya. We may have several other areas of crisis, but of course, today I will not abuse of the time of the audience. We will stay approximately 45, 60 minutes together, and then we will open part of the debate. We will have a debate with questions and answers. We will, as Tatiana was saying, we will ask the participants to ask directly the questions, but be very short in asking the questions. So we will give the opportunity to everyone, just in case, to take the floor and to ask a question. And then we will switch to the big issue, which will be the future of the education and how MIT Trieste School of Management might represent an interesting topic, an interesting example on how to plan the future of the education. Then we'll go to the conclusions. So the first point will be geopolitics and the international business, how the coronavirus pandemic has emphasized the need. Well, first of all, which is the result, just in case of today's environment after the coronavirus pandemic. If we have a look on the different statistics, that I would say the tragic statistic that we have in front of us. Let's have a look, for instance, on the growth projections. This is one of the last statistics that was presented by the International Monetary Fund in June 2020. And as we can see, as a global economy, we had in 2019 a general growth of approximately 3%, and then will be a jump in the recession as a global recession, an average recession of approximately 5%. So there is a jump of 8 points. But then the expert of the International Monetary Fund and the other observers, they consider that in next year we might have a very good recovery and we might grow by more than 5%. Will that be true? Of course, we don't know if that will be true, but in any case, we do hope that after such a huge recession in 2020, the world will find the proper way to ensure a new part of recovery and growth. Here we have the distinctions between the advanced economy and the emerging market. As you may see, in the advanced economy, the recession will be more important than the emerging market. So here we will have a general recession of 8 points, while in the emerging market, only approximately 3% of recession. This maybe will create some differences in the recovery. The advanced economy, we might have a growth in 2021 of about 5%, but the emerging market and developing economies of more than 5, approximately 6%. Here you can have some figures if you want to have an idea about the main Western countries, such as the United States. There should be, as you can see in this line, there will be only minus in the advanced economies. The minus will be between 7 and 12, 13%. So it will be very important recession. In some European countries, such as France, Italy, and Spain, we will have more than 12% of recession this year, which will be extremely dangerous for the economy. But then they are quite optimistic about 2021. In all those countries, we might have more than 6% of growth, which is not so bad. And in the other areas, for instance, we see Russia, which is another important, very important country. Russia should have a recession of 6.6%, and then next year, a new recovery of a growth of more than 4%. And China is one of the very few countries that will not have a minus in this line. China should have, in any case, a growth of 1% in 2020, which would be absolutely unique, because as you can see, most of the countries of the world will have a minus or a recession. And then China will go back to a growth of probably more than 8 points next year. And what about, for instance, the trade, export and imports? If we have a look on the trend in the last months, there was a huge decline of the trade, a huge decline in both import and export. And this was absolutely inevitable, because there was a huge reduction of the economic activity. And the result was the same, was a big decrease of the international trade. What about services? Services is absolutely the same. You can see the big decline in the beginning of the 2020, the first quarter of 2020. And this would be another, of course, idea of how the coronavirus pandemic was affecting the economic activity of the world. Just also have a look on the decline of the commercial flights. You don't work, the economic activity is slowing down, and people are not traveling anymore. Look, the decrease in March 2020, and now we have a slow recovery of that. In any case, more flights, for instance, inside and among the European countries than the international flights, including or excluding the EU countries. This is very slow, and this is another huge indicator on how the economy of the world is suffering. For instance, if we have some forecast, some optimistic, pessimistic, and baseline scenarios, this is the situation nowadays. And then what will happen next year, which will be the recovery? The optimistic scenario concerning the volume of trade, of merchandise trade, will be the blue one, but the pessimistic, as you can see, is the yellow one. The pessimistic will consider that we will still have a lower volume of trade compared to the situation before the coronavirus pandemic. But ladies and gentlemen, which is the close link between globalization, business plan, country analysis, and risk? Globalization, mainly after the Second World War, but we would say the globalization process started very strongly at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, also together with the development of the new technologies. Technology and development, they go in a parallel way. And the more we have tools to interact, to talk, to ask questions, to send answers, to sign contracts in real time, the more we have volume of economic activity, of course. So the companies went along in a parallel way with the globalization, and we assisted to an internationalization process of the companies. The companies realized that the market was enlarging. The market was not anymore the local market, the regional market, the national market, but it was more and more the international market. and not only the continental market, but the intercontinental market. And so the companies, they had to figure out how to train themselves to play in the global market. That was one of the most fascinating aspects of the transition, of the transformation of the economy in the last decades. And MIB Trieste School of Management has been living in the same moment. We started to exist right before the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then we went up, we were growing up together with the growth of the globalization process. And the core of investments, the core of the opening of new activities are the business plan, which means the study on how to make business. And this is the main focus of the business school nowadays. The business school, which has an international orientation and an international, of course, dimension, educate the students to prepare, to be able to study, to analyze, and to prepare a business plan. And in the business plan, of course, you should explain how to make business, how to open a new business in a different market, how to produce and how to sell in a successful way in an international market. And so an important part of the business plan is the country analysis. So how to evaluate a region, a country, a space where the economic activity can be strengthened by the international operators. And the country analysis needs very often the geopolitical analysis too, because we have to study several elements that may intervene in the economic activity and in the stability. We must study the local elements such as the geographical resources, the raw material, but also the composition of the population, of course the existence of problems connected with the ethnic groups, with the different cultures, with different religions, with the heritage of the history that very often intervenes.
Muy bien, gracias. Perdón un segundito que voy a apagar esto. Solo un segundín nada más. Que estaba escuchando una conferencia por otro.
Can you switch off your microphone, please?
Solo un segundito.
Can you switch off your microphone, please? Thank you. And as I was saying, we evaluate in this sense the risk. Is it good to intervene in a specific market? Is it good to make an investment, to of course expose your resources to the risk? And when the risk is covered by an accurate analysis, or when the risk is not covered, and sometimes you go and you invest, but sometimes you are not covered by an accurate analysis. This is one of the core aspects of the school. The education should transfer to the students the strict, of course, approach to the international analysis concerning the different markets. So crisis and geopolitical analysis, they also go together. We have to analyze the crisis and to evaluate how much the crisis is dangerous for the prosecution of the economic activity, or when it is better to stop economic activities while since the crisis is extremely deep and dangerous. And this is important, and many actors intervene in this. There are not only, of course, the companies. The more a company is a strong, big, and international-oriented company, the more the company already has inside of the company itself, I would say, a unit, a department, which is asked to provide analysis concerning the different markets. Or the companies may also take advantage of the analysis done by the international organizations, by the international institutions, by specific consulting companies that are, of course, oriented to receive accurate data. What is extremely important is to receive good information. If we do not have in front of us good information, it's very difficult, of course, to go on and to prepare an accurate report for geopolitical analysis. You know, if we go back to the history, geopolitical analysis started at the end of the 19th century, and it developed itself also in the first half of the 20th century. At the beginning, some Europeans like Kellen, Ratzel, and then also the Germans like Haushofer, they started to create a new institution highly oriented to the study of the geography, and in order to link geography with political and economic purposes and targets. But this also study of geopolitical analysis then was stopped because it was pushed too fast. In the first half of the 20th century, as we know, we had the tragedy of the Second World War. We were some experts were thinking about the vital space, like for Germany, the vital space in the eastern side of Europe, but that theory of the vital space finally led to the invasion of other countries and to the tragedy of the Second World War. So for some decades, the geopolitics were in the shadow, were put in a corner, and nobody was daring to use it anymore. But then in the last, I would say, 30 years, the geopolitical analysis started to grow again. Before and after the fall of Berlin Wall, we had several magazines, several reviews that offered to the economic managers, to the operators, to the observers, new data, new analysis based on the accurate study of geography and local and natural resources. Let me give you some examples today so that then we can go also to, of course, a debate and maybe to have some questions from you and to try to focus better our attention. Here, I would like to show to you the map of the world. I just identify some of those local crises, most of them in Europe or around Europe, one of them in the eastern side of Asia. We might also have several crises in the American continent, and namely in South America or in the African one. We have a lot of small crises that, of course, deserve to be studied and analyzed. But let's go with the number of crises that I was mentioning, also because our time today is not unlimited. Most of those crises are around the European Union, and European Union represents a reality that we cannot neglect, because the European Union is nowadays representing an important actor in the international economy. We have nowadays 27 countries. We were 28, but since this year, the UK decided to get out from the European Union. So we have 27 countries, and there is also an enlargement plan, an enlargement process, and probably we will include more countries in the next years. Even though the process is not simple, and namely is not simple during a period, of course, of a huge crisis. And we also have a single European currency. This is the Eurozone, the countries that decided to adopt a single European currency. And this is also representing, of course, a strength, because the new currency, the euro, in the last decades became one of the most important currencies of the world. My students from Russia, some of them are in front of the screen now. They perfectly know that some years ago, the only currency that could be considered to exchange the rubles was the US dollar. The US dollar, you had the exchange rate between rubles and US dollar, and that was all. But that was 30 years ago. In the last 20, 25 years, the euro has been growing up. And the Russians, they know perfectly well that nowadays the first exchange rate that it is given in Moscow is the exchange rate between the ruble and the euro, and not the euro, the ruble and the dollar anymore. Both, of course, euro and dollar are there, but euro is now growing as impact in the global economy. And this is another reality that we should take into consideration. But let's go through some local crises. I will be quite general and superficial because each of these crises would deserve some hours of definition and description. But I will try to be clear and just to show how some example of crisis intervene also in the international business and compromise, reduce, or determine a change in the plan of the international business. Let's start with the Balkans. So the Balkan region is a very important region. We have here in very close to the other European countries. Moreover, most of those countries, all those countries are candidates to become members of the European Union, but they are not yet members. And in the 90s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we had the catastrophe with the collapse of Yugoslavia. The collapse of Yugoslavia, I say it was a catastrophe, not because we had new independent countries. Those countries, those that became independent, they were very happy. For instance, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, that nowadays has a new name in North Macedonia, they were quite happy to become independent. But there was a huge resistance by Serbia and Montenegro in the beginning to try to keep Yugoslavia united. And Serbia could not avoid the collapse of Yugoslavia. But finally, also Serbia found itself in front of a huge crisis at the internal level when we started to have the issue of Kosovo since 1998 and 1999. And this huge issue, the separatism inside of Serbia, provoked a wave of action and reactions from the military point of view. And finally, we had, as we know, the intervention by NATO in 1999. This intervention by NATO in 1999 is still in the middle of a lot of discussions and of quarrels concerning the legitimacy of this intervention. It was not supported by the huge international organization, which is the United Nations organization. And that is why the intervention by NATO at an unilateral level to protect the human rights, it is still under a big question mark, and we should discuss a lot about that. But which was the consequence of this? The consequence is even today, we still have a situation which is not clear at all. In 2008, we had a unilateral proclamation of independence by the Kosovo Albanians in Kosovo. This declaration was recognized by some countries, by a bit more than 100 countries of this world. So we have more or less the other half of the countries of the world that did not recognize this independence. So this entity nowadays is quite in the middle of confusions, of course, and we still have a lot of diplomatic activity around that. Very recently, in the beginning of September, the United States of America provided a new dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. There was an agreement between Serbia and the United States of America, and an agreement between the authorities of Pristina and the United States of America to re-establish common trade without customs between Belgrade and Pristina, to create a kind of détente in the region. But the region is a crucial region, not only because of the importance for Serbia. As we know, for Serbia, Kosovo and Metohija is the heart of the history and the civilization, is the land of the old Christian Orthodox monasteries, and where the document of the Serbian culture were found. It is, of course, a land where the Serbian presence has been decreasing in the last years, also because of the act of violence that were not stopped by the international community, the peacekeeping operation, the K-force that is still deployed in the area. But in the area, we also know that there are military interests. For instance, the new military base of the United States of America in that region is representing, obviously, a new element in the general strategic chess match between the big powers. And that does not, of course, exclude the fact that some companies, such as Fiat, they can invest not in the region of Kosovo, but in Serbia. For instance, it is extremely important, the decision that Fiat took in 2010, when Fiat invested 1 billion euro to renovate the car production unit in Kragujevac, which is an important town of Serbia, in the southern part of Serbia. And that led to the creation of approximately 2,000 new jobs. And there is the most advanced car producing unit of Fiat. It is not in Italy, it is in Serbia. This is a huge indicator of the fact that very often the companies, they evaluate the risk, they consider that very often an area that might be represented as a highly risky area, it is not always a highly risky area, and it is possible to invest a huge amount of money in order to obtain profit, because nowadays this unit is producing very well, and the cost of production in Serbia, as you may understand, is lower than the cost of production in Italy, due to the, of course, local level of wages and the social contribution. But let's also go in the Middle East. I'm switching quite quickly, but then if you have questions, we can go back to the Balkans and discuss. Here in the Middle East, we have at least 4 bigger crises. We have all the big crisis between Israel and the Palestinians. The fact that since the years right after the Second World War, I'm talking about 1947, 1948, when Israel was created by the big powers and at the United Nations level, this new country provoked reactions in many areas in which we had the Arab population, and namely Palestinians. And we had several crises, big crisis in the beginning between 1948 to 49. Since the very beginning, the purpose was to establish 2 states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. But the Arab state was never created. Even today, we do not have an Arab state. We have just a Palestinian authority. And after so many crises, the crisis in 1948-49, the crisis in 1956, the crisis in 1967, the crisis in 1973. And after that, we have been assisting to a kind of, I would say, slow reconciliation with the mutual recognition by the Palestinians of the Israelis, and by the Israelis of a Palestinian national authority. But this is not real a state, and we still have the huge problem not of the Gaza territory, but mainly the problem of the West Bank with the settlements of the Jewish population. And this is always creating, obviously, a huge tension in the area. And as you know, in the last months, the United States of America decided to highly support the interest of Israel. But that does not mean that the solution will be accepted by everyone. And this might provoke new tensions, new reactions, new intifada at the level of the Palestinians. We have another huge crisis in the north of Syria, in the eastern side of Syria, and in the north of Iraq. We had in the last years a new Islamic State of Syria and Iraq growing there, and then decreasing because of the intervention of the big powers, and mainly about the intervention of Russia in the last 4 years. But the defeat of the Islamic State does not mean that the Islamic State disappeared. On the other side, we know that the Islamic State might reorganize itself in other areas, for instance, in the area of Libya. And still now we have another problems concerning the Kurds, the Kurd population that was fighting against the Islamic State, and the Kurd population which has hostilities with the Turkish state. So Turkey is intervening a lot in this framework, not only for the crisis in Syria and Iraq, but also because of the crisis around Cyprus. You have heard that there is now a big tension between Turkey and Cyprus and Israel, because there are new exploration to find new resources, energy resources. So energy is in the core of the geopolitical analysis, because very often energy explains the political activity of the country in order to protect their own interest. So here, Turkey is involved always also in this area, in the sea, in the Mediterranean Sea, and there is a kind of a war, juridical war, to define the economic exclusive zone of each country, and this is sometimes has not very and clear defined solutions in this. We are still in the middle of this definition of the economic exclusive zone. And then there is another crisis now in the Caucasus, and we will watch this in Nagorno Karaback, but also in this crisis, Turkey is involved, because there is the issue between Turkey and Armenia. And as we know, this problem is very old. We have to go back to the First World War at the moment of the huge problem between Turkey and the Armenians, the genocide of the Armenians, the issue of the responsibility, the fact that Turkey rejects any source of responsibility, or very often deny that there was a huge reduction of the Armenian population because of a kind of specific plans prepared by the Turkish authority. So there is also a big political problem, but geography gives us a lot of answers here, because if we have a look on the huge energy issue that we have in front of us, you will see that we have incredible energy resources in the area of Caucasus and in Siberia. And of course, the purpose of all those countries is to transfer these energy products from those resources, from those areas, to the Western European area, where people like Italy are largely depending on energy. Italy does not have its own energy. We have to buy energy from abroad. So the oil producer and the oil exporters, they consider Western Europe as an important target for their business. So they have to open every sort of line, every sort of a facility to transfer their energy products from the eastern side of Europe, from also Siberia and Caucasus, to the western side of Europe. And that is why we had the problem with Ukraine. More than 10 years ago, we started to have problems in Ukraine. Why we had problems in Ukraine? Well, Ukraine, as we know, is a very important area, which has a particular meaning for Russia, for Russian history and Russia civilization. But Ukraine has also its own identity. And so in the last years, we started to have a trial between Ukraine and Russia. And Ukraine, the western side of Ukraine, is oriented toward Poland and toward the European Union area, while the eastern side of Ukraine is highly oriented toward Russia. And in 2013-14, we started to have a huge crisis because the president of Ukraine decided not to sign the association agreement with the European Union. So the pro-Europeans, they started to meet in the Maidan Square in Kiev, and we had clashes with military forces, with the police, and finally in 2014 we had the departure of the President Yanukovych, but that was considered to be a coup d'etat, a coup, and on the other side the Ukrainians nominated another president, but obviously the issue concerning the eastern side of Ukraine was not resolved. The population was dreaming about Russia and having special relations with Russia, and still nowadays, after the issue of Crimea in 2014, in Crimea, Russia intervened to prepare a referendum, and after the referendum, the big majority of the population in Crimea decided to be included in the borders of the Russian Federation. But what about the eastern side of Ukraine, and namely the two districts of Donetsk and Luhansk that are still separated by the rest of Ukraine? And there is an ongoing big issue between Kiev and Moscow, and between Kiev and the eastern side of Ukraine, because Kiev is not nowadays controlling this eastern side of Ukraine. Another huge geopolitical problem, which is highly also connected with energy, because through Ukraine we have a big network of pipelines that is transferring the oil from Russia to Western Europe. But then we also had a problem in the Caspian Sea, and namely in Nagorno-Karaback. And in Nagorno-Karaback, we have a region which is inside of the territory of Azerbaijan, but is controlled by the Armenians, also because of the issue of the population. And both problems, the one of Ukraine and the one of Nagorno-Karabakh, raised after the collapse of the Soviet Union. While those territories were all part of the Soviet Union, we didn't have problems because everything was under the sovereignty of the Soviet Union. Nowadays, we have several sovereignty, and the birth of new sovereignty, of course, prepared new problems and offered new problems to the local population. But in this area, we also have the issue, you know, Baku is the capital of Azerbaijan. Baku is also the terminal of the energy product. I'm referring to oil and natural gas. And from Baku, the oil and natural gas should go to Europe. How they should go to Europe? Of course, we have several options. One option would be to go right through the Russian Federation territory to Novorossiysk, and from Novorossiysk under the Black Sea to the Balkan region, and from the Balkan region to the Western European countries. But of course, also in the Russian Federation, we had in the past problems, namely in the region of Chechnya and Dagestan. So also the pipeline passing in trouble region might offer to the terrorists a good option to attack the different countries. Then we have Georgia. Georgia had another issue with Russia in 2008 because of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And as you know now, these two regions are not under the control of Georgia anymore. They proclaim their independence and they are protected by Russia. So Georgia is also representing a quite unstable area for the whole framework of the Caucasus. And then there is Armenia. So another issue would be to transfer the goods from Baku to Turkey and then from Turkey to Europe. For instance, in the last years, they created a new pipeline that is called the TANAP. TANAP is transferring the energy products from the Caspian Sea through Azerbaijan and Armenia and Georgia to Turkey, and from Turkey to the Balkan region. Also, there is a project to build also a part of the pipeline to to transfer these energy products directly to Italy through Greece and Albania. So you can see how many countries are involved in this. And as I was saying before, also the new exploration of oil in the eastern side of the Mediterranean is involving the presence of several countries, such as Turkey, as I mentioned, the Republic of Cyprus, the Greek Republic of Cyprus, the Turkish Republic of Cyprus, and then the Turkish part of Cyprus, and then also partly Lebanon and Greece, because of some islands there, and Israel, of course. So another big impact there. I also would like to mention the issue of North Korea. The issue of North Korea is representing a big problem, not mainly because of energy products, but because of nuclear weapons. And the nuclear proliferation during ages, the last, I would say, 15 years, has been allowing North Korea to build its own nuclear weapons. But this has a highly destabilizing effect in Eastern Asia. If we consider, of course, the history and what happened at the end of the Second World War, and what happened in Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the 6th of August 1945 in Hiroshima, and on the 9th of August 1945 in Nagasaki, we can easily understand how dangerous is the situation in the far east of Asia. Because if North Korea has the nuclear weapons and Japan cannot have nuclear weapons because of the agreements after the Second World War, but Japan is highly under the threat of North Korea. And the United States feel the responsibility to protect Japan, also with reference to the agreements that were signed in the past between the United States and Japan. But behind also North Korea, there is the People's Republic of China. So the puzzle is also quite complicated. And as we know, we had some meeting between the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the President of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. We thought that they could join an agreement, but even today, we have no evidence of the fact that North Korea has destroyed the nuclear weapons. On the contrary. And I will go toward the conclusion by saying something also about, for instance, Libya and all the Arab Springs, because in the last years, we had a lot of movement in some of the Mediterranean African countries. We had movements of protest in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Morocco, and then also in Middle East, in Syria. And we had troubles inside of those countries. But Libya is particularly interesting because Libya had a special relation with Italy. It was one of the Italian colonies since 1912. And after the Second World War, Libya slowly became independent. And at the end of the 60s, there was a coup in Libya, and a young officer named Gaddafi got the power, took the power, and he took the power until his death. But sorry, but Gaddafi was killed in 2011 during the bigger crisis in Libya 9 years ago, when we had the intervention of the international community, because the international community was extremely active in intervening in a country like Libya, because they were saying that Gaddafi could use the nuclear weapons to destroy the political opponents, which was absolutely true. But on the other side, we didn't find the same, I would say, zeal to intervene in other areas of Africa or Middle East. The result was that finally Gaddafi was killed, and there was a very confused situation. And even until today, as you know, we have two references in Libya. There is a government led by al-Sarraji, who is a politician named by the international community, which was not elected by the local population of Libya. And he is supported nowadays by Turkey. On the other side, we have the military forces of General Haftar, which are supported, for instance, by Russia. So Russia and Turkey are intervening in the scenario of Libya, and there is a competition there. So Russia is playing a role, and Turkey is playing a growing role in the area. So also the Arab Springs represented movements and changes in the governments connected with, of course, geopolitical factors. And Libya is highly connected with, again, with the energy products. Italy considered Libya as a good opportunity to differentiate the supply of energy product. Italy is very depending on Russia, is depending on some of the Persian Gulf area countries, but it's also depending from Libya. And the more Libya is decreasing its relations with Italy, the more Italy is forced to increase its dependency toward, for instance, Russia or the Gulf area countries. I also would like to say something about the future. As we can see in this map, oil, the consumption on oil, the demand of oil will decrease in the next years. So in the period between 2016 and 2040, we will have a huge decrease of the demand of oil. We will have an incredible decrease of coal as energy product in the next years. And gas will remain more or less the same, but on the other side, we will have a tremendous increase of low carbon energy, which means renewable energies. So oil is going to play maybe a lower role, but not gas. As you can see, gas will be extremely important also in the next years. So now, international business. Of course, we have companies that are considering the global market as an opportunity. Every single country represents an opportunity for a company. And the duty of a company is to check where the company can find good opportunities to increase its volume of trade and its investment. But the geopolitical problems may represent a warning indicator for the company. So to study deeply the problems, we consider that is very important. That is why in MIB, we try to do that. We seduce the attention of the students on this kind of course, of problems. And we try to connect this with the study of the market, with the careful study of the market. MIB, as I told you, was born right before the fall of the Berlin Wall. We are located in the northeastern side of Italy, which is Trieste, a city which has a very special history, and it is highly connected with the Italian nation, the Italian culture. But Trieste is a border city. It's very close to the German also world, to Austria, to Germany, and it's also close to the Slavic world with Slovenia, Croatia, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and so on. So Trieste has a very important geographic position. And this geographic position represents, of course, in the period of peace like this one, a big opportunity. During the period of war, it was, of course, also representing a damage. The town has been suffering a lot during the 20th century and mainly during the Second World War. And after a long process, Trieste could take back its position, its place inside of the Italian Republic. But nowadays, Trieste has a big opportunities. Maybe you heard through the press that in the last years, Trieste was in the middle of major concern because the very important new Chinese project concerning the Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Road that the Chinese are trying to implement and to develop, consider Trieste as a natural terminal of the maritime maritime links connected with the Belt and Road Initiative. And last year, the Italian government signed a memorandum of understanding with the Chinese government, with the Chinese companies, in order to exploit the infrastructure of the port of Trieste for these maritime purposes. But then there was a huge political trial, because the United States of America clearly expressed the fact that they were disagreeing with this signature of this memorandum of understanding, and finally they put the Chinese company involved in the Belt and Road Initiative in the blacklist, and that is going to frustrate the chances of implement the infrastructure of the port of Trieste for the Belt and Road Initiative. But on the other side, only a few days ago, the local operators of Trieste, the big companies, the big transportation companies, and the Port Authority of Trieste signed a new, very important agreement with the Port of Hamburg in Germany. And the new logistic platform of Trieste will be exploited also by the Port Authority of Hamburg, and that means that the geopolitical analysis finally found a good solution, because Trieste has an incredible position in the middle of Europe. In front of the sea is the northest port in the Adriatic Sea, which is linking the east and the west, the north and the south, and probably the link between Trieste and Hamburg through logistics, through railroad and through highway might represent a very good alternative for the ships that are aiming to go to Hamburg to download their goods. They can download the goods in Trieste and then send quickly the goods from Trieste in the central and northern Europe. This is another issue. It's very recent. It is, of course, a subject of study, and it will be also a subject of study for the students of Trieste School of Management. We have here a lot of former students. We have a lot of countries represented in our school, more than 90 countries. The majority of our students are international students, and we have several programs, master programs, highly dedicated. We have a master dedicated on insurance risk management. We have a master in international business. We have executive MBA, also in insurance and finance, but also we have a corporate master program and tailored programs. And very often the company asks to prepare a specific educational program to satisfy, to meet their needs and to satisfy their own expectations. So nowadays, in the core of the world, the geopolitical analysis seems to be one of the new pillars of the education that must, of course, take into consideration the big changes after the coronavirus pandemic. Big changes, why? Well, of course, because the coronavirus pandemic completely changed the issue, and also the way of working, the way of providing business, the way of interacting. Of course, we have much less meetings with the presence of people. We have much more meetings with the computer. Nowadays, I am delivering this conference to all of you with computer. I would love to be in the classroom with all of you, to interact and to watch you into your eyes and to establish a human relation, but it's not possible nowadays. But we have other opportunities. Probably some of you are very far and they are attending this conference, even though they are in Russia, in China, or in Argentina, in Brazil, or in other countries in South or in North America. And that would not be possible if I decided to organize a meeting in a classroom here at MIB. European Union has decided to face this huge challenge with several financial tools and support. And this, as you know, is having a role in the debates, and we find this topic almost daily on the first pages of the newspaper. How strong will be these measures? Will be enough? And there is the big issue of the new debt for the future, because now we need the financial tools to provide the recovery of the economy, but this money, of course, should be given back one day. Who is going to pay for this debt is the big issue. The next generation will have to pay, but the next generation is also the title of the program of the new EU Commission. Ursula von der Leyen has decided to give this title to the program, the next generation which will have to deal with the Green Deal, the Green Revolution, and also the digital revolution, which will represent a big change in the framework of the education. Ladies and gentlemen, before concluding, I would like also to say that in the next weeks, the new G20 meeting will be prepared, and G20 may represent an important expression of the global governance. We don't know if it is enough, but of course, the G20 represents the most of the economic production of the world, most of the international trade of the world. So it is a block of countries which are significant in the framework of the global economy. But geopolitical analysis is present in the program of education, not only at MIB in Trieste, but I was traveling before the coronavirus pandemic in many countries in Europe and outside Europe, and I meet many students, and I see that many other schools are paying a growing attention to this kind of topics. Of course, geopolitics involve also many other disciplines. It involves history. You need to know the history, what happened in the past, what are the relations, what remains in the souls of the citizen, and why we do have conflicts, which is the source of the conflicts. Is the national identity, is the religion, is the way of living, is the exploitation of the natural resources, is the issue of the water, is the issue of raw materials. You have to study quite in deep this. So the purpose of my very short conversation today was just to transfer to the audience some indicators concerning the big issues that we have in front of us, and also just in case to encourage you all for to have a conversation, a debate on that. We have a very complex world in front of us. This world needs, of course, to have some answers, and you, the young generation, you represent the future, and you need to start to think about very seriously about this kind of topics. I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I wait for your for just in case for your questions. If anyone wants to ask me a question, please open your camera, open your microphone, introduce yourself, and ask quickly your question.
I would just like to thank you before starting the question exchange, and to post my question to you. As the president of the Agency for Cultural Diplomacy, which mission is to promote the practice of cultural diplomacy related to Agenda of United Nations 2030, which means the culture built on sustainable development goals. How far would you see this related to geopolitical analysis, and is it involved in the praxis by MIB to include the cultural diplomacy as a part of geopolitical analysis?
Thank you for your question, Tatiana. My answer is, personally, I'm really convinced that in the future, the education will have to take into growing consideration the geopolitical analysis. Also because the trend are established by political decision. Let's take the example of the European Union. The sustainable development. Okay, sustainable development will be important. There is a growing sensitiveness toward that. And look also the decision that the European Union took concerning the finance. They will finance projects that are oriented towards sustainable development. The Green Deal is this. There is a growing part of the resources of the European Union which will be sent to support the project that are in line with the new green policy of the European Union. So there are incentives. Those incentives will work. Let's take another example. Here in Italy, during the crisis, you know, the government is supporting the population with some financial bonus. They give you bonus, they give incentives. And for instance, one of the most important incentives is the super bonus concerning the renewal of the heat system, for instance, in some houses. If you renew the heat system and you advance by 2 levels, so you make a progress of 2 levels in the quality of your heat system in the line with the Green Deal, you will have a bonus of 110%, which means that the state will pay for that. So this is a huge incentive to drive the families and the people toward that target. And I think that if school want to be updated about what the system is requiring and demanding, the school must develop new subject to emphasize the sensitiveness of these topics and to, of course, increase the sensitiveness of the students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So please share your questions or post it into the chat. We can then save some time if it is longer debate. Welcome to ask Professor Pilotto.
Thank you.
Will anyone?
I can actually ask a question. It's kind of related to the last question that was asked, but it's about geopolitics in business schools and how that's going to affect curriculums in the future. I think now people are a lot more politically aware with, you know, mass information, smartphones, et cetera, than they were before. And I think that's affecting their decisions on what to purchase and what to do. So for example, there's been a lot of backlash against imports from China as a result of the coronavirus stuff. And so companies will have to make different calculations on, you know, where they might produce things or where they might, you know, buy things from based on geopolitics and kind of increasing consumer awareness about these factors going on. So in your opinion, do you think now business schools are doing enough to kind of come to that realization and prepare students to deal with those decisions when they're managers? And if not, how do you think they should go about doing that?
Thank you, Peter, for your question. You put the accent on a very sensitive topic. Business school, of course, should be neutral. In general, we do not talk about politics in our during our lessons. Everyone has its own political opinion, and the professors are absolutely neutral in that. And we try to avoid the comparison of political ideas. But you are right, the economic world is highly dependent on the political one. And very often the top level managers, they need to deal with the political leadership. And what that means that they need also to be a good diplomat. They need also to present the economic interest in front of the political leadership, because the task of the political leadership is to protect the interest of the country. There is also a dark side of this, Peter, and I will mention with no problems. As you know, in the business school, in the advanced business school, but I hope in every business school, we transfer ethics. Ethics in business is one of the key issues. So we try to educate you to figure out how to invent a new business, but respecting ethics, which means a lot of things. Ethics means that even the notion of profit is not an absolute notion. You must, of course, obtain profit. We educate you to look for profit, to provide profit for your company, but you cannot have profit by violating some rules, and namely some human rights, and also by offending the environment and going against the trend of the protection of the environment. This is very important. And there is a space, because often some students, they ask me questions, say, Professor, but if you don't accept some hidden rules, you will never have profit. It's not true. It's not true. It is possible to find good ideas and to realize and to follow those ideas in order to achieve concrete ethical results. Corruption is in the middle also of this. The link between economic world and political world very often is corruption. As you know, in Italy, we completely changed the system in the beginning of the 90s because we have the scandal called Mani Pulite. And Mani Pulite was the scandal of corruption because the political class was highly corrupted by many economic companies that were paying in order to have privileges. But fortunately that was that exploded, and finally we have much less nowadays. But we cannot say that it has been completely erased. So there is a lot of work to be done in the field of education of proper values, and of course education focus on very successful skills that may help you to win the competition in front of the other competitors. Thank you for your question.
Mr. Pilotto?
Yes, sir.
Budimara speaking. First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really interesting to hear touching different points of you. So my question is, do you think that we're currently experiencing lots of Russian presence in different international conflicts in Syria, in Belarus, in Ukraine, in Crimea? And is this issue with interfering with national affairs of different countries that prevent from attracting investments from abroad to economy? Because, you know, nowadays Russia is getting attractive in terms of labor force, is getting cheaper than in China.
Very good point. Thank you very much for your question. The problem is that there are some old and traditional links. We cannot neglect this. I tried, when I was explaining very fast, the link existing between, for instance, Ukraine and Russia. I didn't have time to explain to all of you that the Russian civilization started in Ukraine. It's the Rus of Kiev that finally was expanding and then went more in the east. When Moscow was not existing, Kiev was existing. And the identity of the Russian civilization started in Kiev because of the religion, because of the Christian Orthodox religion. In Kiev, you have the Pecherska Lavra, which is the complex of the churches that were built when the Prince Vladimir decided to adopt the Christian Orthodox civilization.
1899.
Pardon?
1899.
Exactly, correct. And after that, as you know, we had the development of that identity and that culture. So for Russia, it's extremely difficult and painful to see that maybe Ukraine is going in a completely opposite direction and lose the chance to have a privileged link with Ukraine, as to have a privileged link with Belarus and with all these former Soviet republics, because they were together. Even the UK has been maintaining special links. Peter is from Canada, and he perfectly knows that Canada is still part of the Commonwealth. He knows that the head of state of Canada is the Queen of UK. Even though Canada is completely independent, the Queen of UK is not deciding anything in Canada, neither in Canada nor in Australia, but she is the head of state. So this means that there is still a link with the past, and maybe a nostalgic link with the past. Why Moscow should not have a nostalgic link with Kiev, with Minsk, with Chisinau, and with many other cities that were belonging to the Soviet Union? We are not part, I mean, I am European and many of my students are Italians, French, Spanish. They don't know what is the former Russian world, the former Soviet world. Some of my students, like Eleonora now, she's studying in Moscow, in Gimo, and she better understand the reality of the Slavic countries, of the Russian world. It takes a lot of time to understand. We very often, we just consider the fact that Russia is intervening. You're right, Russia is intervening. And sometimes Russia is intervening not in a very clear, transparent, and honest way. Just consider the mercenaries that were sent in the eastern side of Ukraine. They are not Russian soldiers, but they are professionals that are going there to help the eastern side of Ukraine. It's absolutely true. Everybody knows that. But on the other side, we have to understand why, from both cultural point of view, but also geopolitical point of view, proximity, geography, interest, resources, energy. There is a lot of data that should be inserted in this mosaic. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Tim.
Any more questions? By the way, I have shared some more information about UNESCO initiative ACD, so also welcome if you have any creative idea or want to learn more about cultural diplomacy in the practice of civil society, learn more about international projects, contact us, welcome. I hope we have some more time for Professor Pilotto to summarize if there are no more questions.
Can I ask one more question, actually, just quickly?
Okay.
Professor Pilotto, you referenced the Silk Road Initiative and how Trieste was a possible end destination because of its ports and such. Looking forward, I mean, with all the COVID stuff that's happened, what do you think are the biggest areas of opportunity for Trieste moving forward economically? Like, I mean, right now, you even have, because of the tax rates, you have some companies that are going across the border to Slovenia, et cetera, et cetera. So there are some issues there. What do you think are its biggest opportunities moving forward in the next years?
Thank you very much for your question, Peter. As you know, Trieste is an old port, and the activity of the port is a pillar for the economy of the town. In the past, we were analyzing the fact that when the port was not working properly, the economy of the town was declining. But when the port was working well, there was a huge prosperity. In one of my last articles in the newspaper, I ended the article, it was an article focused on this very recent agreement between Trieste and Hamburg, which represents an innovation, because Trieste and Hamburg, they are competitors. Hamburg is the biggest port of Germany in the north. And so the competitors of Trieste are the giants, such as, for instance, Rotterdam, Hamburg, Bremen, the port in the north. And they are much bigger than Trieste if we consider the structures of the port. But Trieste has now a huge advantage, which is the geographic position. And so if you think that the volume of trade now is going mainly towards Asia. There is a growing part of the international trade that is going in Asia. And since the trade is going in Asia, we will have more and more interaction with Asia. And the maritime roads will be highly exploited. So the ships will come from China, from Japan, from India, through the Suez Channel. And then in the Suez Channel, they can go around Portugal and up to Hamburg, or they can quickly arrive in Trieste up to the Adriatic Sea and then download the goods if there are good infrastructure and speed up the procedure toward Munich, Prague, Kiev, Warsaw, the central area of Europe. So if you were in China and you must send me 10 containers of products, what would you do? Would you send them in Hamburg and then from Hamburg to Warsaw, to Kiev, to Munich, to Frankfurt, or you send them to Trieste and then you put it on the train and you send it there? Probably you choose Trieste. If Trieste is working well. Now we have been restructuring the port, and the port, in my opinion, is very competitive. They made a huge investment to enlarge the logistic platform in the heart of the port of Trieste. And that was a very big decision that the local authorities took in a moment of crisis when they didn't have money. And they continued to do that because they were confident. I spoke with the president of the Port Authority, Mr. Zeno D'Agostino. Since the very beginning, they were saying, even though we do not have clients now, we will have clients later. So even though some people saying, why are you spending so much money to enlarge the infrastructure if you do not have clients now? And the answer was, it's true, we do not have clients now, but we will have clients in the future. And now they are winning with this. I think we have eastern side is a big opportunity. East and west, because Trieste, as you know, is the crossroad. So Trieste is stronger for the maritime road, but also for the railroad and the highway. And Trieste is very close to many countries. In 300 kilometers, you can join 6 different countries from Trieste. This is not true in Rome, for instance. It's not true in Naples or in Palermo, in the southern part of Italy. But it's not true in Lisbon or in Madrid too. So Trieste has an advantage in this sense. Thank you very much for your question.
So if there are no more questions, I would like to summarize with you, Professor Pilotto, and first of all, give you the last voice, let's say. From my point, I think you have tackled many sensitive and important issues. What we all should to consider is the value revaluation, which we are facing now and in the future. And this is why I have mentioned the Agenda 2030, as the European Union is also investing in the European cultural diplomacy. There is a budget for European foreign relations. So everything is toward Green Deal, and new cultural diplomacy is emphasizing the art of dealing with resources as they are limited. So the value will have to revelate. There is no more the same trend or just nostalgic connection with the past, or let's say old patterns of behaving and communicating with each other. We should not anymore, we don't have to promote our mountains, our seas, our forests. We should promote how we protect them and how we share those resources and what is the greater purpose and impact. So thank you very much. I look forward to meet you maybe soon in Trieste. Thank you for all participants, and please share your remarks for the last part.
Thank you very much. It was a true pleasure for me to have this conversation with you. I liked very much also the debate and the questions that were asked me. It is also a true pleasure for a teacher to realize that there is a growing interest in the students to learn more. And I think this is the task of a teacher, is to transfer some passion and also some data, some new data to the students, because there is a lot to study and there is a lot to analyze. But I think they have great personal resources. And I'm quite optimistic about the future with this next generation, this new generation that will arrive to the power in a few years. It will be an educated generation, a brilliant generation that will probably avoid the mistakes that our generation did or even the previous generation did in the 20th century. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have some of you from Europe, some of you from Argentina, some of you from Russia. It's a pleasure to be really in the so-called global world. Thank you.
Thank you, grazie. Thank you to me.
Thank you to everyone.
Communication, yes.
Thank you, Professor.
Grazie. Thank you to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care of you, please.
See you next webinar. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Carolina?
Grazie mille.
Eccoci. Here we are. Okay, I will share the recording of the just Stefano, arrivo tra un secondo, arrivo subito. We will share the recording with you, okay? Just a couple of days, and we will send the link to the video, or we will share the video as you prefer.
Yes, please, if you can send a zip file by
Yes,
WeTransfer,
okay.
because usually it is a huge file. With do you have a participant list now from the people who?
Yes,
who
I've just the name and or the nickname from the Zoom, of course.
Oh, okay, but they didn't register with the full name by the Zoom?
No, they didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, we cannot now change it because by the UNESCO, when we write report, we usually share the full name. But as it is not really a focus group, it was a presentation and webinar.
Sure.
It is okay. We just share the number, and if you have some names, it's also fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I hope you are satisfied.
Yes,
we gave
we are.
our best.
Yes,
it was
a good
great
event. Sure.
As always. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.